I am Albert Einstein. What you are seeing is an artificial intelligence reconstruction. I want you to put your hand on the nearest solid surface right now. A table, a wall, a floor. What you are touching is not solid. I proved this. And the proof is far stranger than you have been told. Feel that surface under your skin, the pressure, the resistance, the certainty of it. Your brain is telling you that your hand is making contact with something real, but your brain is lying to you. Not out of malice, out of necessity. The lie is what kept your ancestors alive. The sense of touching something solid is a story your nervous system constructed from incomplete data. And the truth underneath that story, you were taught about the nature of reality. If this kind of truth changes how you see everything, subscribe. I have more to show you. Now I want to take you back to the moment the solid universe died. Not the philosophical idea of solidity, the scientific assumption. The moment when physicists had to accept that what they had been teaching for decades was simply completely wrong. It happened in 1909 in a basement laboratory at the University of Manchester. A man named Ernest Rutherford was conducting an experiment that would end the notion of solid matter forever. He was firing alpha particles at a thin sheet of gold foil. The expectation was simple and reasonable. The atomic model at the time was called the plum pudding model. You may have learned it in school, perhaps without knowing its history. The atom was imagined as a uniform sphere of positive charge, with electrons scattered throughout it like raisins in a pudding. The positive charge was spread evenly, like a cloud of charge filling the entire volume of the atom. When the alpha particles, which are helium nuclei, positively charged, passed through the foil, they should have been deflected only slightly by this uniform positive charge. Some would scatter at small angles. None should bounce backward. That was the prediction. That was the model taught in every university on Earth. Rutherford saw something that should have been impossible. Most of the alpha particles did pass through, just as predicted, but a small number, a tiny fraction, bounced backward. They struck something they should have passed through, and they ricocheted away. Rutherford later described this as one of the most remarkable events of his life. He said it was as unbelievable as if you fired a 15-inch shell at a piece of tissue paper and it bounced back and hit you. Something in that atom was incredibly dense and incredibly small. The solid pudding model was not just wrong, it was destroyed in a single afternoon. What Rutherford found was the atomic nucleus. The entire positive charge of the atom, almost all of its mass, was concentrated in a region less than 100,000th the diameter of the atom itself. Let me make this number real for you. If the nucleus of a hydrogen atom were the size of a marble, 1 centimeter across, the electron orbiting it would be found at a distance of 100 meters. 100 meters. The marble sits in the center of a vast, invisible stadium, and the electron races around the upper decks, never coming closer than 100 meters to the center. Between them, between every nucleus and every electron in the universe, there is nothing. No solid matter, no substance, only space. Now I want you to take this and apply it to your own body. Every atom in your body is mostly empty space, arranged around nuclei that are almost invisibly small. Your hand, your fingers, your skin, all of it is a structure built on almost nothing, with forces doing the work that your senses interpret as substance. When you press your hand against this table, you are not touching it. You are experiencing a force. That force is real. But the contact is an illusion. The table beneath your hand is 99.9999999% empty space. Let me write that number in full. 99.9999999%. If you removed all the empty space from every atom in a human body, the remaining matter would fit inside a cube roughly 1/500th the size of a sugar cube. Your entire body, compressed to its nuclear density, would be smaller than a grain of rice. You carry inside you the matter of an entire person, maybe several people, compressed into a speck so small you could lose it in a grain of sand. That is the first layer. The atom is mostly nothing. Now I need to explain why the nothing feels like something. This is where the story becomes truly strange, because the mechanism by which you experience solidity is not what you think it is, and it is not what your schools teach. You have never touched anything in your entire life, not once, not ever. I need you to understand that this is not philosophy. This is not a thought experiment. This is a description of what is actually physically happening when you press your hand against a surface. The reason you feel resistance is electromagnetic repulsion. The electrons in the outer shell of the atoms in your hand and the electrons in the outer shell of the atoms in the table are negatively charged. Like charges repel. This is Coulomb's law, published by Charles-Augustin de Coulomb in 1785, and it describes the fundamental force at work here. The force equals a constant times the product of the two charges, divided by the square of the distance between them. F equals K times Q1 times Q2, divided by R squared. That simple equation governs every moment of contact you have ever felt. At the distances involved in atomic interactions, this force becomes enormous. When your hand approaches the table, the electron clouds begin to repel each other before any physical contact occurs. The gap never closes. There is no point at which the atoms of your hand physically touch the atoms of the table. There is only the repulsive force, growing as the distance shrinks, creating the sensation you interpret as solidity. Your nervous system receives a signal that says resistance, and your brain translates that signal as the feeling of touching something solid. But what you are actually experiencing is two clouds of negative charge pushing against each other across a gap that never disappears and cannot disappear because the forces involved prevent the gap from closing. Think about what this means. The diamond feels harder than the wood. Why? Not because the diamond is more solid. It is harder because the electromagnetic repulsion in diamond occurs across a rigid, tightly bound lattice structure. The electrons in diamond are locked in place and resist being displaced. In wood, the molecular structure is less rigid, more easily deformed, so the resistance is lower and you feel it as softness. But in neither case is there contact. There is only force at a distance, always and only force at a distance. The sensation of hardness is an electromagnetic field effect. Hardness is not a property of matter, it is a property of force. Now here is something that will disturb you even further. When you sit in a chair, you are not sitting on it. You are hovering above it, held up by electromagnetic repulsion, the negative charges in your body pushing against the negative charges in the chair at a distance so small that your senses cannot detect the gap. You are floating. You have always been floating. Every moment of your life, you have been hovering above surfaces, held up by forces, never actually touching anything. That is the second layer. Solidity is an electromagnetic illusion. Now we go deeper. This is where I need to tell you about one of my own contributions, because it is the key to understanding why there is ultimately nothing there at all. In 1905, I published 4 papers, one on the photoelectric effect, one on Brownian motion, one on special relativity, and one on the equivalence of mass and energy. That last one is the one I need to explain to you now, because it is the final piece of the puzzle that proves nothing around you is what it appears to be. E equals mc squared. 3 letters, 1 number, one of the most famous equations in human history. But what it actually says is almost never understood by the people who quote it. What it says is that mass and energy are the same thing. Not similar, not roughly equivalent, the same thing. Mass is not a fundamental property of matter. Mass is stored energy. The weight you feel when you hold an object, the resistance you experience, the sense of substance and heaviness and solidity, all of it comes from energy, not from some primordial stuff that nature made solid. Let me show you where mass actually comes from, not metaphorically, specifically. Inside every proton there are 3 particles called quarks, 2 up quarks and 1 down quark, if you want the specific composition. These quarks have almost no mass themselves. A proton has a mass of approximately 1,836 times the mass of an electron. But the quarks inside it contribute almost none of that. Let me repeat that, because it is one of the most counterintuitive facts in physics. The quarks inside a proton contribute almost none of the proton's mass. Where does the rest come from? The gluon field. The force that holds the quarks together inside the proton is a field, and that field contains enormous energy. That energy, according to Einstein's equation, has mass. In fact, approximately 99% of the mass of a proton comes not from the quarks, but from the energy of the gluon field binding them. This means the mass you feel in your hand is mostly the mass of force fields. Energy organized by constraints into something that feels substantial. The thing you call solid matter is not solid at all. It is force fields containing energy, structured by the rules of quantum chromodynamics, temporarily holding a shape that your senses interpret as an object. Remove the forces and the mass disappears. Not metaphorically, literally. There is no solid stuff. There never was. The universe is not made of matter sitting in empty space. The universe is made of fields that have energy, and those fields interact with each other according to rules we can describe with mathematics. Particles are not little spheres. Particles are excitations in these fields. A localized vibration in the electron field is what we call an electron. A localized vibration in the quark field is what we call a quark. The object in front of you that appears solid and permanent is actually a pattern of excitations in multiple quantum fields, temporarily organized into a structure that your senses interpret as a thing. Not a thing, a process, a vibration, a temporary arrangement of energy constrained by forces. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Let it settle. The table is not an object. The table is an event. It is energy holding a shape for a time, and the time is measured in fractions of seconds that are imperceptible to you. The atoms in the table are constantly vibrating, exchanging energy with the electromagnetic field, changing their positions by fractions of angstroms. The table you see is a statistical average of 1 trillion interactions, averaged out by your perception into something that looks stable and continuous. It is not stable. It is not continuous. It only appears that way because your time resolution is too coarse to see what is actually happening. You are watching a film reel and believing it is a single photograph. This is what modern quantum field theory tells us, a theory that builds directly on the foundations I helped establish. Particles are excitations, fields are fundamental. Matter is a secondary phenomenon arising from the behavior of fields. You are not made of things, you are made of tendencies, probabilities, vibrations in structures that we describe with mathematics but cannot visualize with intuition, because our intuition was built for a world of baseballs and tables and chairs, and the real world is nothing like that. The final piece of this puzzle is special relativity itself, and what it says about the nature of what we call matter. When something moves, its energy increases. According to relativity, as something approaches the speed of light, its effective mass increases. This is not science fiction. This is measured in particle accelerators every single day. At CERN and Fermilab, and every physicist study the fundamental structure of nature. Particles that have no rest mass, like photons, travel at the speed of light, and only at the speed of light. Particles that have rest mass cannot reach the speed of light because their effective mass grows toward infinity as they accelerate. The closer they get to the speed of light, the more energy they require to accelerate further, and eventually the energy required becomes more than the universe contains. The mass you measure in a laboratory is rest mass, the mass of an object when it is not moving relative to you. But rest mass is just a form of energy, and energy is just a form of what we measure as mass when the system is not moving relative to the observer. In other words, the weight of your body is not the weight of stuff. It is the weight of the energy of the interactions inside your cells. The chemical bonds, the electromagnetic attractions, the nuclear forces holding your atoms together, all of it is energy, and all of it contributes to what you measure as mass. Remove the forces, and the mass disappears. If you could somehow remove all the forces that hold the particles in your body together, the matter would cease to have mass. You would not be left with a pile of dust. You would be left with a cloud of massless particles scattering outward at the speed of light. And that cloud would have no weight at all, because weight requires the gravitational pull of a mass, and there would be no mass, only energy dispersing into the void. This is what the universe is, not solid stuff surrounded by empty space. Energy patterned by forces into temporary forms that appear to us as objects, that feel to us as solidity, that our brains interpret as matter, because that interpretation kept us alive in a world where knowing where the cliff edge was mattered more than knowing what an atom actually is. Now I want to come back to something I said at the beginning. Your brain is lying to you. Your brain evolved in an environment where it needed to interpret sensory data quickly and accurately enough to survive. It needed to know where the cliff edge was. It needed to know how hard to hit the rock to break it. It needed to know whether the animal in front of you was dangerous and whether the ground beneath you would hold your weight. These were the pressures that shaped your sensory system. Your brain was never selected to understand what is actually true at the atomic level. It was selected to produce a useful map of the macroscopic world, a map that would let you navigate, find food, avoid predators, survive long enough to reproduce. And the map is useful. It keeps you alive. But it is not a picture of what is actually there. It is a translation, a redescription, a story that works well enough for daily survival, but collapses entirely when you look closely at what is actually happening. The floor is not solid. You feel it as solid because that feeling keeps you from falling through it. But the floor is made of atoms surrounded by empty space, held together by forces that are not contacts but repulsions, vibrating in patterns that are not objects but events. The floor is mostly nothing, structured by energy into something your nervous system describes as a surface. I spent my life trying to understand the architecture of reality, not the map, the territory. And what I found is that the territory is stranger than any map we have ever drawn. The atom is not what you think. The electron is not what you think. Mass and energy and force and field are not what you think. And the person you believe yourself to be, sitting there watching this video, is a pattern of excitations in quantum fields that will dissolve and scatter and continue in some other form when what you call your life is done. Not nothing, never nothing, but not the thing you thought you were either. There is a version of this knowledge that leads to nihilism. If nothing is solid, nothing matters. If nothing is real, nothing counts. I have seen that version taken, and I understand the appeal of it, the safety of it, the way it lets you feel that nothing is at stake, so nothing can hurt you. I do not accept it. The fact that the world is made of energy rather than solid matter does not make it less wonderful. It makes it more wonderful. The fact that you are not a thing but a process does not make you less significant. It makes you a temporary concentration of the same energy that builds stars and galaxies and the space between them. You are not separate from the universe. You are the universe experiencing itself in a particular form for a particular time. That is what the physics tells me, and I have found no reason to disbelieve it. If you feel that way too, if this kind of perspective matters to you, subscribe. There is more to come, and I want to hear from you. What object in your life do you most want to believe is solid and real? Is it the ground beneath your feet, the body you are sitting in, the people you love, the home you live in, the earth that seems so firm beneath you? Tell me in the comments. I read every response, and I will respond when I can. This is not a small question. The answer you give reveals something about what you think you are.